Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hard Things Podcast. This is your host, Blaine Burgess, and this is episode 75 called You Only Live Twice. This is chapter 5 of my book. I'm in a series of probably 7 episodes that are going to be all upcoming chapters from a book I'm writing. And yeah, chapter 5 is kind of a doozy. I've been mulling this over for the last, over a week or so. This episode is December 22nd. Was supposed to come out, 3 or 4 days ago. But just cooking. Absolutely cooking. And I'm very proud of it. So we're going to cook chapter 5, 6, and 7 and bring this thing to a close. And I think this book is the first in a line of three books. So, yeah, first book is all about desire, and today I mentioned in the last episode, the world is not enough. We want to expand, I think, naturally, too. Part of the reason for that is to leave some kind of legacy behind. We're finite beings, but we want to make the most of our time here on this earth. And we can get trapped in kind of a self-pleasure track, like we think like making a lot of money and seeking pleasure will kind of bring us some kind of satisfaction in a way, and as a result, we might get famous and kind of leave a, quote unquote legacy behind. But what I found in my life is that for me is not super motivating, and ultimately not what life is all about, and what actually will give me that feeling, at the end of my life, put my head down on a pillow, hopefully die peacefully in my bed. And I'll be able to die peacefully because I will have actually scratched that itch. And I think I say you only live twice. To give you the background on this, watching the old Bond movies, there's a movie, without giving too much about the movie, like you should go watch it. It's pretty good. It's on Pluto TV for free. You just go to like plutotv.com, search it. You can watch all the old Bond movies literally for free. I mean, there's like ads, but get over it. And so I watched this movie, and it's cool. At the beginning of the movie, James Bond kind of fakes his own death. And there's a whole funeral, and then his body goes under the ocean, and these scuba divers come pick him up, and they bring him to a submarine. And so now he's quote unquote dead. And that allows him to move, swiftly and silently. His enemies aren't necessarily keeping an eye on him anymore because he's dead. So by the end of this movie, there's a whole plot, a whole thing happens. It's all kind of set in Japan and Asia in general. I think China a little bit. And the villain, who is like from Austin Powers, like Dr. Evil is based on, he says like, oh, James Bond, like, not dead, and like he's a bad guy, and it's not above him to fake his own death. So he's like, hey, like, well played. And James Bond is like, turns out it's like Second Life, like benefit. Like I don't remember exactly what he said. I literally just watched the scene. I'm blanking on it. But Blofeld, who's the Dr. Evil character, he famously says like, well, you only live twice, Mr. Bond. So basically saying like, this is your last life. And not only that, I caught you, so I got you. And presumably he's going to kill him. But it is an interesting it's just it started kind of like a thought experiment for me. And I had a big long road trip and a lot of time to think, turned on some podcasts, some good music. And I was just thinking, and I do some of my best thinking while I'm driving, but there's just a chain of thoughts from different sources that kind of meditating on the nature of life and death. And, just because someone's cells are processing energy and regenerating themselves, and someone is up and atom and engaging with the physical world, doesn't, like, that qualifies as like biological life, but not necessarily spiritual life, so to speak. You could be a coward in your daily life and actions, and someone who passed a long time ago but lives on in the memory of people, could be more alive than you because they're somehow motivating others, through their previous actions to not be a coward, to have courage and change the world literally in the name of someone who's already dead, and someone who's alive has less, influence on the reality we live in. And so thinking about the physical and kind of metaphysical, definitions of life and death. And I recently watched this show called Shogun, and one of the characters talks about three hearts in Japanese wisdom. And it's funny, you only live twice, kind of set in Japan. And three hearts concept in Japanese wisdom is a person has like a false heart or a mouth for the public, so like what they say, and they have another heart for friends and family, so that's like people they let in kind of their inner sanctum, and then a true secret heart only for yourself, rarely shown to anyone. And it's interesting when I think about life, people who truly live, I think those three hearts are as aligned as they can be. That true secret heart is kind of showing through in a big way with their friends and family, but maybe even also towards the public. I think about, obviously in my profession as a chiropractor, if you give yourself to your patients, your true kind of heart, if you really want to help people and you give that to your patients, that's a really powerful thing. And I think that is a true catalyst for change. So seeking to make those three hearts as close as they can be. I don't think they'll all ever truly be the same. And maybe, people like Jesus or Gandhi or Buddha or whoever in the past, have achieved that, where all three, they're completely vulnerable and kind of open and showing. And maybe that's not necessarily the goal, because you don't want to suffer the same fate as those. You'd rather live and do good and be alive. But then also, as I did mention, sometimes dead people have more effect on the living. So that's kind of the thing that we're dealing with. But as I mentioned, there's a Shakespeare quote that came up to me. And it goes, "Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never tasted death but once. Of all the wonders that I yet have heard, it seems to me most strange that men should fear, seeing that death, a necessary end, will come when it will come." And that's actually from Julius Caesar, the play. And as I mentioned before, if you spiritually are a coward, you die many times. But I even think people who are courageous also kind of die. Like, we are faced with these choices in life, and they're kind of like the razor's edge. Like, if you bump up against these situations in life, no matter what decision you make, you're going to be forever different. And in a way, that's a little bit of a death. It's a kind of an incomplete death. Like, you're still technically living, but it's possible that a decision makes it so that you can't go back, or just certain constraints on you. You could make kind of the alternate decision, but like situations where one decision, like you have a choice, but one of the options really isn't an actual choice. Like just the person that you want to be makes it so that one of the choices is just invalid. Like you can't be who you know you are inside and still make that choice. And there's all kinds of mental gymnastics I think people do. They make those choices that they can't make, and then they convince themselves that it's okay for some reason or another. But all that does is cause pain for yourself and other people around you. And I think at the end of the day, that pain comes home to roost and creates change one way or another. So, yeah, I think cowards die many times. I agree with Shakespeare, but also the courageous also die many times, and we're shaped every day potentially by things that will change our lives for the better and for not. But I do think the courageous path is the only way to secure outcomes that are more desirable for yourself and others, you know. So that brings me to kind of the, I think these got a little bit out of order. Maybe not. But, so the, like three little sections that I see in this scenario of like life and death are kind of life and death in relation to yourself, like just your inner world, like the three hearts. Life and death in close relationships, and life and death in public. And it's really interesting. I mentioned like cowards dying, and then also I think kind of the opposite of that is like while you're living, there's a Reagan quote that says, "Too often character assassination has replaced debate in principle here in Washington. Destroy someone's reputation and you don't have to talk about what he stands for." And I think it's really interesting. It's kind of talking about the courageous person. So if you stand up for what you believe in, people are going to try to tear that idea down. And they're going to try to tear it down through the ways that you're imperfect. And as humans, we're all imperfect. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a perfect person. And my imperfection has led me to, like, closer to perfection, though. Like, through the lessons that I've learned, the choices that I've made, the deaths that I've endured, you know, what remains of me is just an absolutely vital living capacity. You know, still flawed, still going to make mistakes, I know, in the future. But I've definitely felt this in terms of, you know, if you're talking about a situation and something that needs to change, you know, someone will either take that to heart and genuinely consider it and commit to not repeating that mistake in the future, or they can deny it and try to make it about you in some way, about your imperfections and things that you've done. And honestly, I think the only way to get to true love and true like power is to be completely vulnerable and show all of your, you know, mistakes and flaws, and still stand up for the right thing, and just ask people to join you in that. Like, that's the only thing you could do, is invite them to like do it with you. And if someone chooses to kind of go that negative route, try to destroy your reputation and ignore, you know, what the right thing to do is, then that's a kind of a death of their own, kind of a coward's death. that will have some kind of consequences in the future. And that's like the concept of karma, is like your actions bring consequences, and you hate to see it, but also it's just kind of inevitable. Like, you have to rely on people to make the right choice, and if they don't, just knowing that work, the right thing, someone has to do the right thing. So that person chooses not to do it, like, you still have to live on that side of the equation. And that's what I mean when I say who you are and what you stand for. You might have a choice, but it's really not a choice at all, because one of the choices it contradicts who you are. And to know that for sure is a gift. And that brings up a great quote by Mark Twain. The two most important days in your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why. So another kind of concept of you only live twice. You're born, and that's your first life. And then the day you find out why you were born is kind of your second birth in your second life. So we've been talking about a lot about death so far, but, anytime you talk about death or life, you have to talk about the other. And I've been very fortunate in the past, year or two to kind of have this experience that Mark Twain's talking about. I've been alive for 35 years now, and the first 30 or so, maybe less, you are just trying to figure out what this thing's all about. And once you figure out what it's all about, then you have to kind of struggle to accept it. And it's a lot to stomach. And you can stomach it on your deathbed at the end of your life when you're 80, or you can stomach it when you're 35, or maybe even sooner when you're like 25. And, the sooner you can do it, I believe, the more of a chance we have to kind of change the world. So, but no matter what, accepting it at any point, like, good for you. But it's really hard, and so I think some people never do, and some people do it really early. And those are the people that have, at this point, like, doesn't guarantee that you can change the world, but that's the only people who have a chance. Because knowing your purpose, like I was saying, you are faced with situations and you know that you have a choice, and it's really not a choice. When you're free to do the wrong thing and you just know that you can't choose it, that's genuinely, it's, in a way, it's inconvenient because not everyone else is going to share that responsibility with you, but also it's completely a gift because it's true freedom. Like, you have to just do the right thing and deal with the consequences, and ultimately, instead of agonizing over the decision, you just do it and live the consequences, and it almost, in a weird way, takes the pressure off. Because then all your energy can be spent on just dealing with the consequences. And I think those consequences, for good or bad, that's when, like, a real ego death takes place, like a full ego death. And that's what Gandhi was talking about when he says the ego dies and the soul awakes. And your soul is, I think, most connected to your life's purpose. And that freedom I was talking about, of having a choice and realizing you don't really have one. So, again, like, being on a side, I think of the other side of, my second life, so to speak. And I think for people, we have maybe many ego deaths, or maybe multiple. Like, I don't think it has to be twice or three or four. Like, it can be as many as needed to kind of get the point across, or as many as needed to transform you into what you need to be, to do what you need to do in this life. So in a way, our choice overall, our main choice is to participate in our path and what we're supposed to be doing, or to sit it out. And like I said, the coward's path, or to sit out, or the courageous path. And either way, you're gonna, no matter what you do, you're gonna be dying. So you might as well do the courageous thing. And that's not to say that you should do it by default. You should do it because you really don't have a choice if you want to be the best version of yourself. But also do it by virtue of what it is. It just is the best thing to do. So I'm going to kind of put a ribbon on this. I had one more quote. This one is by David Eagleman. This is one of the quotes that came up for me pretty early, but there are 3 deaths. The first is when the body ceases to function. The second is when the body is consigned to the grave. The third is that moment sometime in the future when your name is spoken for the last time. So I start with that third part. When your name is spoken for the last time, you think about someone like Jesus. I can't tell you when the last time that Jesus' name will be said. And Christianity is so widespread, like unless there's like a mass human extinction, like I really just don't think that's going away. So this guy's going to technically live. That third life's going to be forever. And that story of his sacrifice, we don't actually know what happened back then. We don't know for sure. Nobody that we know is alive back then. We don't know if it ever even happened, if it's real. But the story lived. And that's the thing that is so powerful. I think about this in personal relationships, but, the truth and reality definitely is subjective. Like there's objective reality, and then subjective reality lives in all of our brains. So like what you believe about yourself, the placebo effect, what you believe about a drug that you take that you think is going to make you better, what you believe about, your partner in a relationship, seeing the best in them, like knowing who they are at their core and trying to pull that out of them in spite of, negative actions. And I think too, like maybe a public figure, like a politician, we oftentimes hear of, perverted things that happen behind the scenes, but you can think someone's the greatest in their public life, and you can almost ignore their dark side and support them fully in their public life. And the truth is kind of somewhere in between, but the story, how that lives in your mind, is ultimately becomes the truth. So while that story can be true in your mind, you can never forget about objective reality, the real truth of the thing. Whether Jesus existed or not, the things that he stood for, in my observation, tend to be powerful, dynamic changing, like energy shifting principles that are really powerful in terms of living life and taking care of people while we're on this earth and all those things. So it's important to know your reputation and how you live in other people's brains, but really your objective reality is what truly matters while you're here. If that's accurately reflected in history or not, it still matters. And you might die that third death a little sooner, but you did the right thing while you were here. Your first and second lives were worth it. And that brings me back. So the second life is when the body's consigned to the grave. That's when you actually stop moving. I think that first death is when the body ceases to function, I think a lot of ways I think of depression and like psychological disorders, or some kind of disease. You know, you get a cancer diagnosis, that's your first death, and then you have that second life until you actually pass away. And the third one is how people remember you. And it, like I said, it is important to consider all of them. You know, before your first death, you know, you're just trying to figure life out, and then you die and you realize what life's really about. And then, you know, once you know, again, you have to like struggle to accept it. And I think if you can accept it and spend as much time between that first and second death helping other people, I think you make yourself eternal. You really push that third one as far as it could go. Someone like Jesus, whether any of that really happened in his first and second life, you know, his third life is pretty strong. People aren't giving up the Bible anytime soon. So those are just things that I think about. But in terms of like, you think about books like How to Win Friends and Influence People, you know, we can do a pretty good job with like earthly pursuits, but spiritually I think is where a lot of the wins are to be had. So I spent a lot of time and painstaking effort learning those lessons, and now I'm excited. I think I'm going to have a lot of time between my first and second death, and I will choose the path of courage as I slowly die. And when it comes time to leave my physical body, you know, that third life, I hope, you know, I don't need it to be long, but if it can help other people, then I hope it is. So on that note, speaking of third lives, I have a new podcast called Gonstead Revival, and it is the third life of Dr. Clarence Gonstead, who practices a specific type or practices a specific type of chiropractic that he developed in accordance with chiropractic principles of his time. And he kind of pushed the profession forward in a way that maybe not a whole lot of people took up on, but I would say maybe 25% of the profession at least knows about, and another smaller percentage, you know, practice pretty hardcore, like what he preached. So in terms of someone that has a really strong third life, someone that I want to take after in that way, like doing third life the right way. Yeah, Dr. Gonstead. And so if you want to check that out, again, it's Gonstead Revival. If you're curious about chiropractic, it is for patients, but like current patients or people thinking about trying chiropractic. It's for chiropractic students, and it's for current doctors too. If you know, maybe you've been practicing for a while and you want to just get that energy back up, you know, to where it was when you started. Maybe even when you started school. You know, I know school's been hard for me, and you pass boards and you graduate, and then business and life beats you down, and you know, maybe you're just a little behind the 8 ball. Maybe a little energy, a little reminder will get you back on the path. Then this could be for you. So, you know, if you're at all interested in what I'm doing outside of this podcast, you know, I'm hoping to expand professionally. You know, this one is almost like a personal for pleasure podcast, and the skills I've gained have made me comfortable enough to be able to talk about something I really care about on this new podcast. So, yeah, do me a favor, give it a listen. If you like it, let me know. And until next time, this has been Blaine Burgess, and I'll see you later.